Alright guys, Saturday, day 4 with the V4. We got some good 2 back-to-back 20-mile days in this thing. Now today we're going to cruise for nice 6 miles. I was planning on maybe getting 10 today, but that's just not what's in the it's not in the cards, as they say. I drew a 6 this morning, not a 10. So tomorrow we got 2 jacks, double jack, because that's a 22-mile long run. So just a nice smooth 6. I usually do 6 to 10 before a long run. I think max I've done is 12 before a long run, but the goal is really today to just cruise out there, get some nice aerobic mileage, and get the body prepared to do a hard effort tomorrow, which means not going too hard, but also not just sitting around, because you don't want your body to stagnate. You don't want your mind to stagnate before a hard effort. So we're going to get out there and cruise, and then I'm going to come back here and give you 5 of my tips for recovery and warding off injuries, injury prevention, or just strengthening our bodies so we can get out there and run more mileage, improve our PRs without the risk of hurting ourselves. All right, I'll be back in a jiff.
Love this stuff. Athletic, Run Wild, IPA, non-alcoholic. I'm on my tailwind, so this is a really good replacement for post-run recovery. Feels a little bit wrong to have something that tastes like beer at, what time is it? But hey, it's got the carbs, it tastes good, and helps recover. So today, let's dive into the 5 strategies to help us recover during high mileage builds, during maybe marathon training, half marathon training, anytime where you're gonna be increasing your volume in order to stress your body intentionally to hit a PR. So I would love to highlight one key theme that you can take away from the video before we get into any of these strategies. And today that theme is equilibrium. I know that's a 5-syllable word. I usually try to use words only under 3 syllables, or balance. But this idea of recovery as a state of being, of making sure that we're always in some form of recovery, because during marathon training or half marathon training, we're always in a state of stress. So as we're adding stress, we need to be mindful of doing things that replace the energy that's draining from our body. So equilibrium is the word for today, or balance. And when I was growing up, balance was almost a joke in my house, because my mom used the word balance to describe everything. You need to have a balanced diet, you need to have a balanced life, do you need to do sports, you need to do art. But it's the same thing with training. We need to have those stressors, those fitness builders going out there ripping off some hard threshold pace. We also need to have our sleep, our fueling, and our strength, whatever else things we're going to do that we'll get into in this video, to recover, to make sure that our body is in this optimal state of balance or equilibrium. And one important thing to stress here is that does not mean that we don't feel tired, we don't feel fatigued. The optimal state of equilibrium during marathon training or half marathon training is actually in that orange lining territory where we're almost at the breaking point nearly every single day. And as we get more advanced with training, we can push that boundary a little bit to be more stressed, feel more fatigued, because we know how to rein it back in. But for beginners, and this is something that I pulled for Hal Higdon, the goal should not be to get to that orange line territory. You want to be feeling green or yellow most of the time. And that's why in the Higdon approach, which is not the style that I train in, but he stresses run your first marathon as slow as possible to just get to the start line healthy. And that's my biggest goal with any training block to this day. Getting to the start line healthy, and through the whole process of training, making sure that my body, my training, everything I'm feeling is in that state of equilibrium. All right, guys, so let's get into it. This first strategy I have for you today when it comes to recovery and injury prevention during training is this idea of train, don't strain. This is something that I took from Lydiard and his approach. So Lydiard was one of the first teachers of high mileage training. He was a guy from New Zealand. He built up some of the top Olympians of his era through increasing their volume to, he's a KM guy, so 160 kilometers per week, which if you follow the American system, that is 100 miles per week. And the way that he was able to do that was through a large volume of this work being done at not a hard threshold, stressing our body effort, but either a steady state pace where it's comfortably hard, or a general aerobic development pace, a much more relaxed conversational pace where we're still building fitness, we're adding a little bit of stress to our body, but we're not redlining, and we're not going to be putting our tendons, our muscles, and joints through as much impact as if we're getting out there and running hard every day. So he had this expression called train, don't strain. When we were doing this type of high mileage training, or any type of training, whether it's lifting, whether it's running, we want to be training and we want to be feeling like we're putting our body under stress, but we don't want to be pushing it so hard that we are straining our bodies and in pain. Now, there are certain times during the marathon training or half marathon season where we can push our bodies a little bit more, and I liken it to LeBron James during the NBA season, right? He's 38, 39, 40 years old. The past few years, he chooses strategic spots during the season. All right, I'm going to go hard this game, because there's no way through an 82 game season you can go and put up 35, 40 points a night and be going all out when you're in your late 30s, early 40s. So with that, no matter what age we are during marathon training, it's a similar approach. We want to be strategic with where we build in intensity, and the bulk of our mileage should be done in this relaxed running state so that we're training well, but we are not straining. And so for me, what that looks like and how I implement this during my training is right now I'm actually doing 2 workouts per week. I'm using the Jack Daniels final 12-week marathon training program, and it's a beast. I flashed some B-roll up on the screen yesterday of the book, and you can see the workouts are 22 milers with 16 miles of marathon pace with 2 miles of threshold work in there. And it's really complicated, mentally taxing stuff that I built my fitness up to a point where I can approach to do some of these workouts. I'm not even hitting all of them all the time, but I'm only doing that twice a week. So if you think about how we flow up and down with our intensity, I'm having 2 days of big mileage, big intensity, and then the rest of the week, maybe I'll have some 20-mile days here and there. But within those 20-mile days, I'm not running sub 7-minute pace. I'm not running, even some days, I'm not running sub 7:30, sub 8 pace. So I'm strategic with where I apply intensity, and I love to do a lot of these relaxed miles. And within this train, don't strain philosophy, that is my number one recovery strategy, using these relaxed miles as a way to recover from the harder work. So not only am I using a lot of these miles to build fitness, I'm using them to recover from the harder work as well. And once you build up your running specific fitness to a level where your body can sustain a little bit more mileage, these recovery runs are really a nice building block of a good half marathon or marathon training program. Now, a lot of people ask me about pace for these recovery runs. For me, I'll do it anywhere from 90 seconds to 2 minutes slower than my marathon pace. This might be different for some of you depending on what your pace range is, but generally you want to feel like you're having a nice relaxed jog. You shouldn't feel like you're getting out of breath, and you shouldn't feel at any point like your heart rate is jacking up and you're getting into that tempo zone where you know how it feels when you're running in that comfortably hard zone. Recovery runs should not feel like that. It should be a time to recover from the previous day's work and get your body ready for the next hard day's work. It should not be a time to stress the body more than it already is. All right, guys, the second strategy here to help strengthen our bodies, prevent injury, and stay healthy, recover during a hard training block is pre and post-run nutrition. So again, if you remember this idea of equilibrium or keeping our bodies in balance, I like to think of every meal I'm eating as fuel and as some sort of input to the next workout I'm doing, or as recovery from the previous workout that I just did. So with that frame, we can shift away from the idea of I'm just gonna eat some quick carbs before I get out on this run, or I'm gonna have a recovery shake right after I do this run. All of that stuff is great, but it's not just the pre and the immediate post that are going to be important for our nutrition. It's going to be the breakfast, the lunch, the dinner, all those square meals. And so what's worked for me and my nutrition, and I'll say what's worked for me because it's going to be a little bit different based on you, is to have probably 60 to 70% of my calories coming from carbohydrates, and then I'll fill in the gaps with other protein sources. So I do a lot of beans, a lot of tofu. That's what's worked for me, and I generally try to plan my meal strategy around when I'm running. So if I'm running, I know I'm going to be running at say 8 or 9 in the morning, I'm not going to have a huge breakfast. I'll have maybe a bagel or a banana with peanut butter with my morning coffee, and then I'll have my big meal at maybe 10:30, 11, 11:30, 12, and that will hold me over until my afternoon run, and then dinner is always my massive meal, and I'll almost always have a second run dinner. And with that, I'll also do the pre-run drink sometimes. I will do Tailwind endurance fuel so that I'm not going into the long run underfueled, and that's going to be a key thing here. Underfueling is my number one enemy during marathon training, and for a lot of you out there, it could be your enemy too, because if we don't have enough energy to push hard, we're not going to be able to execute our workouts, we're not going to be able to build fitness, and we also put our bodies at a little bit of an injury risk if we're operating in a caloric deficit. So marathon training or half marathon training is not a time to prioritize weight loss. That's something, if that is a goal for you, you can attempt to do that outside of key training times, because when we're in training, we want to make sure that we're fueled all the time. And that's just another variable that gets a little bit tricky to manage if that's another goal, because the primary goal during marathon training or half marathon training should be hitting our paces, staying healthy, and making sure we're fueled so that we can get out there and run hard the next time that we need to. So you all know that I'm a huge fan of the Tailwind. So if you are looking for any of the supplements pre and post run, that's what I'd recommend. I use Tailwind Endurance Fuel for pre, and then post I use the Tailwind Recovery Mix. So the next strategy that I want to dive into is strength work. Now, strength work comes in a bunch of different shapes and sizes, forms and formats, but the key idea here is we need to be doing something to strengthen our body to make sure that I can withstand the stress and the impact of running whatever mileage level that we're running. And so that looks different for everybody out there. If you're running 20 miles a week and lifting, and you feel that that 20 miles a week is getting you where you need to be and you're not stressing your body, then that's a great setup for you. Or I know some other folks out there who are training at 40 or 50 miles per week, and they've been running marathons for decades, and they do strength work here and there to help prevent some of those injuries. That's also a great strategy. But the key thing here to remember is any type of marathon training we're doing is putting our bodies under a lot of stress, so they need to be able to be strong enough to withstand that impact. And so what I've found for me personally is I have 10 plus years of lifting experience under my belt, and I had that going into my running journey. And so I haven't needed to prioritize lifting as much as maybe someone who's brand new to athletics in general might do. Now, it's not great to go through a whole training block with not hitting the weights at all. And I actually heard this a really interesting quote recently from Jared Ward, who's a Saucony athlete. He's an American marathoner, and he said he doesn't feel right during a training block until he's squatting at least 200 pounds. Or was it deadlifting? I don't know. But he said he didn't feel right until he was lifting heavy during a training block. And so with being a parent or working full time or having other things going on in your life, it may be hard to balance both running and lifting and working. But if you can add a little bit of strength work here and there, that's going to be super helpful. Last week in my video, I highlighted the Nike Training Club app, and I'm not affiliated with them. I wish I were. If someone's watching this from there, go ahead and reach out to me. But I used it a lot early in my running journey as a way to get some extra high intensity work in, and those are all body weight workouts that you can do 10 minutes, 15 minutes at home. They're absolutely great. I also went through another period during my training where I was doing CrossFit, and I felt super strong at the time, and that was getting my heart rate up really high. I had a great threshold because I was getting up to 170 every day, and I could hold that pain cave pace. Right now in my training, I'm not doing a lot of strength work, but I am doing a fair amount of stroller running, which is a pretty run specific strength exercise where I live in a hilly neighborhood and I'm pushing 35, 40 pounds up a hill at least once or twice per week. So ideally I'd be getting in there into the gym and lifting, and I think I might be adding that back during my next training block, but we have to work with what we have and what works for our schedule, and that works for me right now. So I would suggest for you, find one or two things that you can do consistently, reliably through a training block when it comes to strength, so that you're protecting your body just a little bit more. And the key thing here too is extending your muscles, having a little bit of a different range of motion, flexibility than just comes with running. Because if we're just running, we get really tight, which is great because having that tightness in your muscles is also a part of building run specific fitness, because you want to be strong in the exact areas that you need to be, but it can be a little bit restrictive. That's where the tightness comes in. And especially with running a lot of miles at an aerobic pace, we can kind of get locked into having a little bit of a less range of motion when we get out there. And that's also why it's good to do some sort of strength or flexibility work. And if Charlie's watching this, she's going to be laughing because she knows I'm not great at this, but I'm also relatively young, so I can get away with not doing this stuff all the time. So it's really going to depend where you are in your journey. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I'm lifting 3 days a week and stretching for 30 minutes after every run, because that's absolutely not what I'm doing. But I've locked into a system that works pretty well for me, where I have relaxed running as the basis of my recovery. I'm eating solid meals, I'm making sure I'm fueled, and with that, I'm able to get out there and hit the next run hard. All right, guys, so the fourth key strategy that I have that is going to be hugely important for any type of injury prevention or bulletproofing, whatever you want to call it, is executing the long run well, and specifically not going into it under fueled. So I talked about that a little bit in the pre and post run nutrition section, but one thing that helped me a ton not feel that I'm at the brink of injury every single time I get up there to the 90-minute mark on the long run is fueling within that long run. Now, there is tons of different strategies on what we should be eating before the long run, during the long run, after the long run, whether we should be carb loading, for me, what I've found works well is to have about 200 to 300 calories during that long run. And no matter how I'm feeling going into it, that ensures that by the time I get to the end of it, I'm not doubled over, clutching my stomach, feeling like I'm going to puke because all I have left in there is bile. Now, if you've been training for a while and you've done fasted long runs, I used to do that, or if you've gone into a long run not having a huge breakfast, not fueling, you know that feeling when you get up to that an hour 30, hour 45 minute mark where you feel like you're just completely out of fumes. You got to just keep turning over your legs. It's impossible to get up hills. And that's not really the type of training stress that I would encourage. And that's not what's worked for me. That's more of the straining part that we talked about in the beginning, and that is not training, not straining. That is 100% straining. So aside from having a really solid carb-heavy breakfast, I like to do the Tailwind endurance fuel during the run. Then I'll also do the Morton gels. So those usually have about 100 calories in them. I've also experimented with Huma gels in the past. I love those as well. Those are made with chia seeds, so it's a little bit different than the more scientific formulation that Morton has. And then I also tried the Spring Energy gels, and I know a lot of runners like those. They are good and they have a lot of calories, which is why I like them. Some of them even have 250 calories, which is great because if you do 2 of them during a run, you can get 500 calories. For me, that didn't work great because it didn't sit in my stomach the best. During run nutrition is one of those areas that's going to be hyper specific to you, but the 3 brands to start with that I would highlight are Tailwind for the in-flight endurance fuel. Morton, their gels go down really easily. They taste a little bit weird, but I've never had any issues with them. And then if you do want to experiment with a different gel that's a little bit more flavorful, because Morton only uses non-flavored gels, I would suggest the Huma as an option. They do get a little bit runny in the summer because they melt, but a lot of gels do, so I won't hold that against them. Then after the long run, that's also going to be a key recovery window. And so we want to make sure we're getting in a lot of calories to replace everything that we burned during that long run. So it's possible that for me personally, I can burn 1,500 to 2,500 calories during a long run. And my baseline for caloric needs is already about 3,000 to 4,000 per day, even without running a lot. So adding that on top of what I'm already burning with the long run, I know that I need to be replacing them a ton. So what I generally try to do is have some sort of quick carbs after the run, get the blood sugar back in check, just replace the immediate, make sure I'm not getting a head rush. And then about an hour to 2 hours after, I'll try to have that big meal. And I've fought the underfueling battle before, and I know 4 to 5 hours after the long run, that's also generally when the wave comes crashing down. So I try to make sure to have a second meal if possible after that, or I'll just make a huge, massive lunch and have that as my main meal of the day before we get to dinner time, and then again, just double up on the food and the servings. So I don't count calories, and I'm not measuring out food portions or doing anything like that. I try to do it by feel, and there's different strategies out there. Of course, I found that works for me. If you're completely new to this though, getting a metabolism test could be super helpful. This is something that I did 2 summers ago. That's how I know my baseline caloric needs. And then it will tell you how much you need to be replacing after these long runs and after everyday regular workouts. Now it's funny because my guy Vinny B, he's the one who requested this video, and he told me, what do you do other than nutrition to recover? But nutrition for me is the biggest pillar of recovery. So it's a little bit hard to separate the two. And that's why I've talked so much about nutrition here, because it is the biggest thing that I've done to ensure that I'm getting out there to be able to push hard tomorrow and the next day and the next day, and for all those miles to go. All right guys, so the last thing that I wanted to highlight here is the Gizmos and the gadgets. So everything that we talked about before, relaxed running, how we approach training, not overstretching our bodies, doing the nutrition, that's 95 to 98% of what's going to help keep us healthy and going out there. The other 2 to 5% that can be the cherry on top, those are the gizmos and the gadgets, all these fun, cool things that we can buy in the store or online that make doing this recovery a little bit easier. And so like I mentioned, I don't foam roll a ton, I don't stretch a ton. I do occasionally where I'm feeling sore here and there, but I'll highlight some of the products that I do use when I'm doing this. And I also will say, if you're a runner who tends to have more tightness, more soreness, doing this a little bit more than I do would probably be beneficial. And for you, the equation might be this is 15 to 17% of what gets you healthy and keeps you out there, versus for me, it's a smaller portion, and I know that nutrition is the biggest part of keeping that equilibrium. So with that, let's go inside and I will highlight all of the recovery products that I use. Hey, pull up with the Rebels. About to set my PR for quickest backyard to door walk. Okay, so first up here, we got the Theragun. Now, I think they've renamed this to Therabody, this company, and they have a fancy new logo. But this is what I've used for the past few years as a go-to massage gun. I absolutely love this thing. Anytime I got, yeah, I love this thing for anytime I have a little bit of soreness. This was actually a Christmas present from Charlie, so thank you, Charlie. The next one, and this is a newer one that's come into the rotation, is the Chirp RPM. Now, this is pretty similar to the last one that we highlighted, except it's got a little bit of a foam rolling action here. Now, this is super sweet. You can use it like a foam roller. Boom. You can also put it in the stand here, and it will just go, which is kind of cool. So then you can foam roll on top of it. And then, of course, I have the classic foam roller here as well. And I will use this to especially get the calves and the hamstrings and quads. And like I mentioned, all of these things are going to be great as additions on top of our everyday activities that we're doing to keep us healthy. It's not going to be the core of our recovery regimen, but they can be helpful and they add a little bit more fun into the routine. So I hope that was helpful, guys. Let me know all your favorite gizmos and gadgets and recovery tricks. I'll be back tomorrow with another video.